Good evening and welcome. I see by that clock up there it's only 5 to 8, but by other clocks it's 8 o'clock. We might make a start. Welcome for braving the cold winter evening to be here with us this evening. It's with great pleasure that I welcome our speaker this evening, Nuria Daly. Nuria began her life in Ireland, moved to South Africa where she spent a number of years and raised her children, or started to raise her children. In her journey after that, she discovered the work of Carl Jung and also Sufism. And this evening she will share with us from her book, which is available for sale for those of you who have seen it or not seen it. And Nuria would be delighted to do a book signing at the end. And this is her journey of discovering the witch as teacher in fairy tales from across the world. So welcome, Nuria. I might just say one more thing. Nuria will try to complete by 9 o'clock, but maybe a little over. For those of you who have trains to catch or need to leave at 9 o'clock, please feel free to just quiet down. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll try and be finished by 9, but it's going to be hard to keep it all in 1 hour, unfortunately. I'll dive straight in then and try and cut the waffle. Sufis use stories as teaching tales, as a way of teaching, because you can get so many layers of meaning into a story that you can't get into a straight teaching. And also, I think there are many fairy tales that have vestiges of not Sufi perhaps, but of spiritual teaching in them, because that's how people were taught even thousands of years ago. So we can see with Rumi and with Nasruddin and with many stories the deep esoteric meaning behind them. So at a retreat many years ago now, our teacher Nawab brought an ancient Han Chinese fairy tale to the retreat and told it to us with respect to service. And I was completely blown away by the fact that here was a story that was probably 2,000 years old, if not older, that had teachings and meaning that was as relevant now as it would have been back then. So I began, therefore, to work with fairy tales, and I would ask Nawab, well, have you got another one for me? And I ended up working with 5. I'm working with 2 of them today, because they're the 2 that have fabulous witches in them, and that's really important. And while I was pondering these fairy tales, one of my Sufi sisters was on a retreat in India, and she said that Nawab had mentioned, sort of, that in the story of Aladdin, the Sufi teacher was actually like disguised as a witch or a wizard. And that brought everything, all the pieces of the jigsaw fell into place for me. That the teacher doesn't want to be known or seen as a teacher. It's the teachings which are important, not the teacher. So, so anyway, that opened up a whole way of looking at things. So, yes?
There's a bit of a ringing.
Oh, is it?
So I might
up a bit.
hold that.
Right.
Try that.
Okay. Is that better? So, the witch first occurred in a fabulous story of the Fairy of the Dawn. And I'm going to go through it very quickly till I get to the witches. The opening scenario in this tale shows us a mighty emperor who ruled over an empire so large that no one knew where it began or where it ended. And this is a perfect description of the vast inner realm that Henri Corbin calls the Alam al-Mathal. And it's the realm of the creative imagination, which Jung also has recognized in actual fact. And it is very, very real. It is more real than this outer world, because we see this world through the perspective of our ego, our attitudes, our culture, and our beliefs. And this is actually the world of illusion. The inner realm is real. And the emperor or the king always represents the heart in Sufi stories, so that might give you a clue. So this emperor tells his youngest son Petru that they, his sons, must bring him water from the spring of the fairy of the dawn to bathe his eyes so that they will laugh forevermore. So that there's a backstory to all of that. And here's the quest for fresh spring water, the water of creation and the water of life. Very often in Sufi stories or in fairy tales, there's a quest for water. Now, the older brothers, who can be seen as aspects of the ego, leave on the quest, one after the other, until they come to the borders of this vast empire. And around it was a deep, deep trench, which girdled the whole realm. But there was only one single bridge by which the bridge could be crossed. Guarding the bridge is a monstrous dragon with 3 fearsome heads. And this bridge is at the edge of our conscious reality. And the dragon that's guarding it is really fierce and very, very scary. Both brothers don't even try and fight the dragon. They run. They flee from it terrified. And I find it really fascinating that the dragon is miffed when they run away. He wants them to fight him. And there's something in us that wants us to leap across the abyss, to cut the dragon's head off and go into that other realm. And the dragon challenges us to breach that realm where we can really find ourselves. So Petru, the younger one, now takes up the quest. When he first meets the dragon on the bridge, he tries to fight it, but he finds that his horse isn't steady enough under him to allow him to cut off the dragon's head with his sword. Petru realizes that he needs a better steed, a better horse, to do this. And by horse here we mean his spiritual tradition, his inner structure, or his belief system, even his religion, if you like. It's not strong enough to support him to overcome the dragon. So he returns home to be met by his old nurse, the witch Birshka, who had also been his father's teacher. She knew he was returning, and she knew why. Birshka tells him that he's not gone about things properly. And here we see, for the first time really, that in our inner practice we have to do things properly. It's very, very important. Now, Birshka instructs him to find the horse that his father, the emperor, rode in his youth. In other words, to discover for himself the structure of the sacred teachings, which seem to have been lost or gone underground since his father was the emperor. And nowadays, many young people do not have a strong tradition to support them any longer, and so they cannot take up the fight with their demons without being desperately wounded in some way, and it's a serious problem. We could even see this like in Christianity. You have to delve very deeply into the mysticism of what Christ taught to find out the structure of the religion rather than the outer forms of religion itself. When Petru asked his father about his old horse, there seemed to be nothing left of it except the old and rotting scraps of its veins, the outer guide and rituals, perhaps, of that particular religion or tradition. These are the remnants of the old traditions, which involve mastery of the self or ego, are symbolized by the reins. You know, you need to hold the reins to master the horse. And so we need to have reins, we need to have practices, we need to have a structure for our own mastery of ourselves. Petru brings the remnants of the oldest, blackest, and most decayed pairs of reins to his old teacher. So he goes back to the original, as far back to the original teachings as he can go. And Birchka is able to work with them. She chants, she murmurs, she puts on incense, she does the whole thing with these teachings. And then she hands these reins over to Petru. And when she gives him the reins, she asks him to strike them against the pillars of the house. And this puzzled me for a bit, but I think it means the pillars of wisdom, of Sophia, of the divine feminine. If he strikes the reins against the pillar, something happens, and indeed it does. It's like an initiation, really. A beautiful brown horse stands before him when he strikes the reins against the pillar. And this is his psychopump, the steed which carries us from one realm to the other. It guides and sustains us. And it can also be seen as the internalized teachings and teacher after an initiation. And even after, say, a Jungian analysis, you end up internalizing your analyst and internalizing what you've learned. And that would be the steed, that would be the beautiful horse that carries you to the other realms. As soon as Petru sits on his steed, he feels his heart braver and his arms stronger, and so his brown horse tells him to sit firmly in the saddle, and away they go. It takes a long time to reach the bridge where the dragon is standing, that place on the borders of our consciousness. This time the dragon is more fearsome than it was before. This time it has 12 heads. And I think that relates to time. You know, there are 12 months in the year, 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 hours of the day. There's a complete cycle gone by, and this dragon gets more and more fearsome. And I think it does. The longer we leave it, the more fearsome it gets. And this is really true. Petru shows no fear, simply frees his arm for battle. The brown horse tells Petru exactly what to do. And indeed, Petru soon cuts off the largest head of the dragon as he leaps over the bridge and the dragon. So he goes up and he's away over the other side. And sometimes the only way is to simply overcome the largest obstacle. And in this case, it would be like a complex. You overcome the biggest one that you need to get you to the other side. And for me, that was actually fear itself. I took a long time in analysis working with fear as the monster that lurked outside that I was so scared of. But once we lop the head of that biggest one, we can go over to the other side. And then we're in the magical realm of Alam al-Mithal, which is the realm that Henri Corbin talked about in his book. The Sufis believe in the realm of the creative imagination just as much as Jungians do. So Petru and his horse now enter a place which is strange and wondrous, and a place that he'd never seen of or heard before. And I'm cutting this as short as I can. He journeys through 3 different woods, which are like the stages of life: the copper woods, the silver woods, and the golden woods. He's warned by his brown horse that he must not become distracted and pick the flowers which offer themselves to him along the path. But he can't resist, and he succumbs to temptation. He so desperately wants to pick these beautiful flowers. And we too are distracted on the spiritual path by the beauty and the delights of the world we live in. We also pick the flowers at each stage of our life. It's impossible not to do so if we live in the world, actually. And Sufis try to be in the world, but not of it. In actual fact, we reckon it's more difficult to live in the world and be spiritual than it is to be a hermit. But anyway, And what I love about this part is that he weaves the flowers that he picks into a wreath, first a copper wreath, then a silver one, and finally a golden one. And these wreaths symbolize what he has made from the flowers or experiences that he's had at the different stages of his life. The achievements of our lives are the wreaths that we weave out of the flowers that we have picked. This is also a great lesson for us of not becoming attached to the things of the world. We can appreciate them and love them, but we shouldn't get attached to or pick them. Each time he picks the flowers, he has to fight the Welwa. And this is a fearsome monster. I couldn't figure out what Welma means. I still can't. But each time he overcomes the Welwa, it turns into a beautiful horse. And I think the Welwa monster could be seen as the ego which wants to keep the flowers. It wants to keep what we have picked in the different stages of our lives. And we can't hold on to it. So 3 times in 3 stages of life, copper, silver and gold, he overcomes the Welwa until he has 3 Welwa horses, the third and most fearsome one being female. With his 4 horses, he is now entering deeper and deeper into the inner realms of the feminine. First into the kingdom of the goddess Mittwoch, which is Wednesday in German, and she's the feminine form of Mercury, so the story tells us. Although this day used to be called after the Norse god Odin, but Mercury is the messenger and is the communicator of the gods. And it is through her that we can communicate between the outer and the inner realms. Her realm is extremely cold. It's of being frozen out in the very absence of love and human feeling. And it's a very negative aspect of the goddess, and indeed all the realms that he goes to in the goddesses are very negative. And, well, we'll find out why later on. He is warned not to warm himself at the fires alongside the road. This time, being stronger, he is not distracted, and he endures the terrible cold until he comes to the dwelling of Mercury. Here he enters her hut and greets her respectfully. She tells him he has borne himself bravely, and so she gives him a box which will tell him anything he wants to know and give him news of his homeland. It's a bit familiar, that, isn't it? It is the ultimate communication and connection device. It is like gaining the intuition and the knowingness that comes with practice and with understanding. The ability to know what is happening in the other realm when we are deep in one realm, when we're deep in another. And like our dreams, in fact, our dreams communicate between the 2 realms. When Petru is a little way from her hut, he uses the casket and asks for news of his father, who he discovers is furiously angry because his older brothers are trying to rule him and the empire, and they're not fit to do it. They're just not fit for it. Now Petru and his horses move to the kingdom of the goddess of thunder, where it is hot enough to melt the marrow of his bones. I think that's so descriptive. He is again warned not to succumb to the lure of flowers and cool streams and shade by the side of the road. He cannot even speak, it is so hot, but eventually comes to the hut of the goddess of thunder, which is Donnerstag, or Thursday. That these goddesses are represented as days of the week indicate a progression of time. This time, when he gets off his horse, the goddess herself comes out to meet him. He's invited in and asked about his journey. This goddess is, like the others, constrained and seen very negatively. So Petru's journey is about rehabilitating both the feminine within and in the outer realm. And without the support of the goddesses, his whole quest is impossible. I think these goddesses represent, in their negative aspects, represent what they've experienced through the patriarchy, where they've been so repressed that they come up negative. So the goddess of thunder promises him a gift when he returns from the Fairy of the Dawn. Now he finds himself in a kingdom which is neither too hot nor too cold, a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, with the air soft like spring, and he finds himself in the realm of what the book calls the goddess Venus, but it's Freitag or Friday, and that these goddesses have names that go back to Norse mythology could well mean that the stories themselves have a really pre-Christian origin or heritage, but they come from a later time when the feminine, as reflected by the goddesses, has been relegated to their darker aspects by being repressed. It is from this that Petru must save them, and in saving them, he also saves his father's kingdom. And note that Friday, Freitag, which the story says is Venus, would have been the day of the Norse goddess Freya. I have trouble with that. Who is like Venus, is the goddess of all forms of love, including sensual love. But Freya also loved romantic music and stunning floral arrangements. And notice the flowers and the wreaths in the earlier part fit in with the floral arrangements. I think that's rather lovely. Though this captivating goddess had numerous lovers, she was the wife of the mysterious Norse god Od, whom she deeply loved and was devoted to. They were never separated, even after his death, when he was admitted to Valhalla, the other world. Freya comforted the dying and eased their transition into the other world, serving as guide and companion on the journey. So in fact, she is the perfect representation of the sublime feminine love and wisdom and guide of souls. She's a wonderful goddess if you want to get into her. The realm of Freya is guarded by the whirlwind, or the wild elements of nature. So Petru's horse tells him to toss the copper wreath to this whirlwind, with a particular incantation, really, recognizing the fairy souls that make up the whirlwind. And that does appease the wind, which tears the wreath to pieces. I'm still working on what that actually means. Maybe we can talk about that afterwards. Now the horse teaches Petru the whole ritual of what he must say and do to gain access to the very reclusive goddess, Freya. He must offer her the silver wreath that he has made, and he must say that he has made it especially for her. In fact, he has to tell her that the whole difficult journey has been made just for her. And this is actually the truth, but Petru doesn't know it. We also must learn and come to know that everything that we do is for the great goddess of love. Freya asks to see the wreath which Petru has woven, so that she can discern what he has actually done with his life, with the flowers he has picked in the silver woods. Everything, even the most terrible, heartbreaking and difficult experiences that we have to overcome, or the flowers, they have a beautiful outcome. They always do, even though we don't always discern it or understand it at the time when we are suffering. And it's in overcoming our difficulties that we evolve ourselves. So Petru passes the tests which Freya gives him. She accepts his wreath, and he is invited into her house. He treats her with the utmost respect, just as we should treat our teacher. And here I love this next scene. I can just feel into it beautifully. Petru sits near the fire, and he listens to everything that Freya chooses to talk about. He listens to all her complaints about the world of men. He agrees and he empathizes with her in her anger and outrage. He knows what she, as the receptive feminine, has suffered. This is the aspect of the feminine which has to endure the dark side of the world of men. The Freya who Petru encounters is ancient. She has many wrinkles, like the old crone or the witch in many fairy tales. But Petru devours her with his eyes, as the story says. He sees her beauty and he feels her love. And this makes Freya very joyful in her heart. These goddesses are, in fact, our inner teachers, where the witch is really our outer teacher, if you like. Then Freya goes on to explain who she really is. She has been there right from the beginning of time, from the dawn of creation. Nothing was that is, and the world was not a world when I was born, she says. She became herself when the world came into being as part of our human experience. She was the most beautiful girl that was ever seen, the archetype of the beloved, of love and of the lover. And many hated her for it. And this is a telling remark regarding the patriarchy's fear of the archetypal feminine. But now she is very, very old. And we learn that the realm of the great goddess of love and beauty is right next to the realm of the fairy of the dawn. Now, this is extraordinary, and it gave me a hint of the structure of the inner realms. So if you imagine the whole world, the universe as an onion, a proverbial onion, the outer life and manifestation and consciousness could be the outer layers of the onion. And as we go deeper into ourselves, through the various levels of the unconscious, the collective unconscious or mind of God, we go through into the deeper realms. In Sufi thought, the inner planes of existence are the astral, the jinn, the angelic, from cherubim to seraphim, the archangels, and the deepest and central to all, the throne of God, which is, in fact, the divine presence. The archangels are believed to surround the throne of God, which is right at the center. So it's a circular thing, and we're moving from outer to inner. And it actually would make the fairy of the dawn an archangel, which is understandable when we see how really, truly terrible she is. She's awesome. The goddess continues to teach Petru for a very long time and tells him all about the kingdom of the fairy of the dawn and how it is guarded on all sides by wild and fearsome beasts. The goddess tells Petru about the well. Whoever drinks from it will blossom again like a rose. Freya asks Petru to bring her a flagon of this water, and she will do anything to prove her gratitude. Petru tells her that he has another task to fulfill there, and Freya is really happy about this. She's happy that he wishes to heal his father, and by doing so the whole realm. His journey is in service, and the goddess does love our service. Freya then gives him a tiny flute, which was inside an iron-bound chest. An old man gave it to her in her youth. She tells Petru that whoever listens to this flute goes to sleep, and nothing can waken them, but that he must keep playing it, and then he will be safe. He must play it while he is in the realm of the fairy of the dawn. So we have this sense of sound, and Sufis do a lot of practice with sound and with color and with all sorts of things, but he has to keep that sound, and then all the parts of his mind, if you like, when he's in the deepest of realms, are asleep and don't bother him or distract him or damage him in any way. In the morning, Petru feeds and waters his horses, which is like doing our morning practices. And he is about to leave. Freya stops him with some more important advice. Firstly, he must leave his one beautiful horse with her. And this means that he can only take with him what he has learned through his journey through the inner life. The horse that he got from the outer, working with the witch, cannot go into that inner realm. So he has his 3 Welwa horses with him here. Finally, he is told that he must never look the fairy of the dawn in the face, for she has eyes that will bewitch him. She is hideous, more hideous than can be imagined. And Freya tells him again that he must not look at the fairy. Now, they use the word hideous, but I think maybe it should be that she is terrible to behold, that she is too awesome for human eyes to take in without becoming overwhelmed. Anyhow, the whole realm of the fairy is very beautiful, I won't, since I'm in a bit of a hurry, I won't go into the beauty of the palace that is so splendid, but it is an inner place that's known by shamans and mystics. It's a real place. So Petru jumped down from his horse and left it to graze, and he played his tiny flute. And remember that Krishna, the Lord Krishna, played a flute as well. There's importance in this sound and music. This is a seriously difficult and dangerous place for Petru to be, with the only tool being a tiny little flute. But as he played it, all the strange creatures and monsters of that world went to sleep, and they couldn't harm him. He was able to go through the realm. Now he quickly goes upstairs through 48 sumptuous empty rooms to find the Fairy of the Dawn in the 49th room. And this is the magical 7 times 7 number of the universe and of completeness. He's come to the very center of all. And in the middle of this huge room was an ancient sacred well that he'd come so far to find. The fairy herself was asleep beside the well, and on a table nearby was bread made of doe's milk and a flagon of wine, the bread of strength and the wine of youth, we're told. And deer are sacred to the feminine moon goddesses, so bread made from doe's milk is a sacrament of the goddess and her strength. Wine is solar, masculine, the god of youthful action. So this is a sacred meal signifying completeness. It's a celebration of the sacred marriage of the masculine and the feminine. And Petru longs for this. Despite the warning, of course, Petru does look at the Fairy of the Dawn. And as he does so, a mist comes down over his eyes, over his senses. He drops the flute and stops playing. So the fairy opens her eyes and looks at him. In this look, Petru further loses his mind. So this glance from the Fairy of the Dawn can pull him down into nothingness. But he does remember the flute at the last minute, and by playing on it, he regains his senses. In this seeing of the fairy herself, he has actually lost his sense of himself and is almost completely overwhelmed. And it reminds me of a talk that David Tacey gave here years ago about the drop in the ocean. Like, we're all a drop in the ocean of consciousness, or of the divine, if you like. There's a lot of Sufi songs even about being a drop in the ocean. But we have to have enough knowledge and power to hold our sense of dropness when we go into the ocean. Otherwise, we're lost. We have lost our senses. And, we really can lose our minds. And back in the days of rebirthing, when people weren't strong enough in themselves to be able to sustain that, some people did lose their mind and never really come out of it. And Doris Lessing, in her book Journey of a Descent into Hell, I think, talks about how there are many people in mental institutions who have actually had a spiritual emergency and lost themselves in that ocean. They lost their sense of dropness. So the fairy drifts off to sleep again. He kisses her 3 times and lays his golden wreath on her forehead. This golden wreath he had previously worn woven from the flowers of the golden wood. And it is in effect the crown of his spiritual life. Gold represents Nur, the uncreated light of God, enlightenment and immortality. He crowns the fairy with this wreath, and it's an ultimate letting go of detachment from everything, even what is sacred to him. It all goes. All we're left with is nothingness. And he's now complete mastery over himself. In doing this, he is nothing, and yet he is everything. His kisses show his devotion and love for the Fairy of the Dawn and all she represents. He is in the presence of God. He then eats the bread, drinks a cup from the wine of youth, does this 3 times over, partakes of the sacred sacrament of bread and wine, and in doing so nourishes himself spiritually. In a sense, it's a coming together, a sacred marriage. He fills his flask with water from the well, and he vanishes. He's done. His task is done, for now. He passes through the garden. Everything seems more beautiful and vibrant. The flowers are lovelier, the streams run quicker, the sunbeams shine brighter, and the fairies seem gayer. All this, as the story says, because of the 3 kisses that he gave the fairy. But this is not the end of the story. Petra is back in the saddle, speeding through the realms. To Freya, who is waiting for him, she knows he's coming. She's really happy to get her flask of magic water. Then Petra swiftly visits the goddess of thunder, as he had promised. But as he's about to leave, she gives him a warning, and we can all take this warning to heart as well. Beware of your life. Make friends with no one. Do not ride fast, or let the water go out of your hand. Believe no one, and flee flattering tongues. Go, take care, for the way is long, the world is bad, and you hold something very precious. Yeah. Then the goddess of thunder gives Petra an enchanted piece of cloth. Whoever carries it will never be struck by lightning, pierced by a lance, smitten with a sword, and arrows will glance off his body. So he's protected from the weapons of the masculine, weapons which are sharp and which pierce. And they're the weapons of the world. I mean, people who are in the working world these days know all about the arrows that maybe don't glance off your body and how you're often stabbed in the back by the sword. So, it's very meaningful. Now Petra takes out his treasure box, his communication device, and he inquires how things are going at home. Not good. The emperor is now completely blind, and Petra's brothers are still demanding that their father give him governance of the kingdom. The emperor would not allow this and says he will wait till he has washed his eyes with the water from the well of the Fairy of the Dawn. Then the brothers have gone to consult the old witch Murshida, who tells them that Petra is already on his way home bearing the water. They have already set out to meet him, and they are going to try and take the magic water from him and claim as their reward the governments of the emperor and of the empire. Sorry. Petra would not believe this and thought it was a lie. In anger, he threw the treasure box on the ground, breaking it. And it's so hard for Petra to believe this of his own brothers. Or if we look at the brothers as aspects of his ego, then to think of ourselves in this way, to think of parts of ourselves that we really love, that we actually shouldn't trust. So, yeah. So we have a final lesson to learn. Having won the prize, we need to keep it pure and not allow the ego to claim it. This is like the temptation we see in many stories after a great initiation, like the temptation of Christ after his baptism. This temptation is to use the knowledge and power gained for personal or ego use. It was the witch Murshida who told Petra's brothers that he was returning home with the water of life. And I wondered, why did she tell him that? But in fact, she's doing what she does. She's a witch, and she's a teacher. So in thinking about this, I realized that Petra's denial of what he had been shown was his last weakness. It was something that he still had to overcome in himself. The last lesson that he had to learn, to distrust even the brothers whom he loved, or really the parts of himself that he loved. And I will do, hopefully, a quick aside about the Enneagram. There's an Enneagram workshop in August, I think. But I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, which means I'm the helper. And the ego loves this thing of being helpful. and being good and seeing yourself in a really, really positive way. But the truth is, we do this because we want something. We want love, we want recognition, we want to be seen as a lovely person who's being so darn helpful. And that part of ourselves has to be killed. But it has to be killed, as we'll see in another story, by the very trait that it is, by the helpfulness in a divine sense, in a sacred sense. If we really want to help people, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't be helpful in that way. It's like, it takes a thief to catch a thief. Anyhow, we'll come to that a little bit in another story. Soon Petru catches glimpses of his native land and hears his name being called. So somehow the sooner we get closer to our outer world, the harder it is to remember what we know and what we've learned from the inner. It's like forgetting dreams when we wake up sometimes. His horse tries to tell Petru to ignore the calls of his brother, but he is once again unable to heed this advice. The world calls us back again and again to face our innermost much-loved traits. He turns around, finds himself face to face with his two brothers. He forgets the warning from the goddess of thunder, jumps off his horse to embrace them. And it's really touching and sad when this happens. Our inner horse, when it sees us doing this, can only hang its head, as did Petru's beautiful brown horse. The brothers offer to carry the precious water for Petru, but he refuses. And then he tells him that he has this cloth from the goddess of thunder. He gives them all his secrets, so they now know how they can kill him. Oh dear. The brothers immediately understand that the only way that they can get rid of Petru is by water, by drowning. And he's not protected against this element. And another way of understanding this part of the story is to think of the stream of water that they want to drown him in as the water of life. And so to drown in this water could mean to let yourself get completely immersed in your outer life, your everyday life again, and forget the journey that we've been on the inner level. To simply use the prized water and lose himself in the world. But the horse neighs a warning, and this time Petru understands what it means. He heeds the inner voice. He doesn't go with his brothers. He goes home to his father and cures his blindness. End of story. I'm getting there. Now, there's another story that I really want you to hear, and I will try and cut out any extraneous stuff. But this is about the witch, the Baba Yaga, and she's a fabulous witch, and that's her house there. Now, in this, the Tsar, again the heart, wants his sons to find appropriate wives so that he can have a true heir. And to do this, they have to shoot an arrow like Cupid to see where it falls. And it's really a test for the princess to find the kind of partner, soul, who could be a queen. And the wife that they choose is a reflection of their own evolution. The arrow of the eldest prince is found by the daughter of a nobleman, while the arrow of the next younger prince was picked up by the daughter of a merchant. Neither was a proper match, because a prince should marry a princess. We all know that. Now the youngest son, Prince Ivan, shoots his arrow up into the air, and eventually he finds it, after a long search, in the mouth of a frog who's sitting in a bog, and this is his frog princess. He really does not want to accept his fate and asks for his arrow back, but the frog insists that he take her home as his wife. And so many people who've actually read this story resonate with this, especially women. We feel like we can resonate with being a gross frog stuck in the mud. But the bog is also an in-between place. The Irish would call it a thin place. It's magical and mysterious and very sacred. And you might know of the bog people, the bog bodies that are found in bogs of Northern Europe. They're actually they've been ritually killed and buried in a very, very sacred place, and this bog is very sacred. And so it's no accident that the frog is sitting there with the arrow in her mouth. Now the Tsar tests his son's wives. Now I won't go into that too much, except that she always wins all the tests over the other brothers' wives. And she always says to him, "Don't worry, you just go to bed and you'll feel better after a good sleep." And during the night, while the prince is sleeping, she goes onto the veranda, throws off her frog skin, and becomes the princess she really is. She makes whatever she needs to do for her prince. So, skip through there. Finally, the frog princess, whose name is Vasilisa, and she's the daughter of a Tsar, we're told, is asked to show herself by the Tsar at a great banquet. But how can the Prince Ivan take his frog wife to the banquet, to the ball? But the princess has a plan, and she tells him to go alone, and she'll arrive after him, da-da-da. She gives them exactly what's going to happen, and sound comes into that again. So she arrives at the ball, and she's very beautiful. She's wearing an azure gown studded with stars and a shining caplet on her head. And he leads her to the great oak table of the banquet. And here is a magical description of a sacred sacramental meal. Vasilisa sips some wine, pouring the rest into her left sleeve, nibbles some swan meat, dropping the bones into her right sleeve. After eating and drinking, it's time for dancing, and this time Princess Vasilisa leads Prince Ivan onto the dance floor. Now she waves her left sleeve, and the sacred wine transforms into a beautiful lake which formed in the hall in front of them, the lake of magical feminine powers. Then she waved her right sleeve, and the bones, which represent the indestructible masculine life principle, manifest as white swans floating on the lake. The swans, representing solar power, gliding on the lake, demonstrate the union of masculine and feminine principles. This is the sacred marriage and a complete transfiguration. The princess has performed wonders, and she's recognized as the queen that she truly is. However, to do this, she had to leave her frog skin behind. And the prince, finding it on the veranda, throws it into the stove and burns it. Isn't that terrible? This burning of the frog skin is so final, so irrevocable. It just grabs me in the heart every time I think about this. But now the frog skin has been thrown into the stove and burned. The princess is no longer able to take any active part in the story. She says to Ivan, "Ah, Prince Ivan, what have you done? If you had waited only another 3 days, I would have been yours forever. Now I must say goodbye. You can look for me in the 30th kingdom beyond 3 times 9 lands. There you will find me with Kashay the Deathless." And this is very, very, very far away. And she turns into a cuckoo and she flies off. And my own feeling about this is that Vasilisa may not have been able to rid herself of her frog skin, and it may have needed this drastic action by the prince, because 3 days is a long time in mythological terms. And I want to tell you very quickly the story of the trophy wife to explain this. Many years ago, when I was in a group, there was this woman, and she was very beautiful, and she had married a very, very rich man, and she lived in a mansion, and she had everything that she wanted, but she was deeply miserable because her husband, she had to act. She, if you like, she acted everything that she was. He caught her at a time when she was her most beautiful, and then, how can I put it? She couldn't be herself at all. So she came to this workshop. having acted, she was the perfect wife, she was the perfect mother, she was the perfect hostess. She gave wonderful dinner parties, and everything was absolutely perfect, and she was very beautiful. But she was miserable because she could not be herself. She was not seen in herself. Her frog skin had been burned. And this is a terrible, terrible thing to do. Her partner had burnt the frog skin. And so she came to this workshop that we were at and tried to find herself again. It was very difficult. On his quest, therefore, to find his princess, Ivan finally meets his teacher and guide, a wise old man. And here we have direct speech, very rarely used in the story. The wise old man says, "Ah, Ivan the prince, why have you burnt the frog skin? It was not you who put it on, and it should not be you to take it off." It feels there's huge wisdom in these words. You know, yes, we want to speed up our own waking process and remove the veils, but life has to progress in its own time, and forcing something against its will has terrible consequences, really negative consequences, and she's frozen into this time warp. She's really frozen. She can't do anything because she's caught up in not being herself anymore. And our Murshida, our teacher, says that we should not wake up people against their will, but we should raise their consciousness slowly according to their natural development. The prince thanks the old man and now follows his bowl, his fate, across the country. He comes to the animals or traits which appear, and he wants to kill them. The ferocious and powerful bear, the tricky and speedy hare, the drake, and the feisty and aggressive pike. He spares them all as they will be useful to him later. All our traits, however we judge them, must be recognized and mastered. We must not kill parts of ourselves because we don't like them. They all come in useful later on, as we will find out. And now we find ourselves at the favorite part of the story. The prince comes to a little hut standing on a chicken leg at the edge of the forest. The prince, this is the abode of the Baba Yaga, and she's the witch of Slavic fairy tales. She's really scary. The symbol of the little hut at the edge of the forest functions as another in-between place. The hut is standing on a chicken leg and it's turning round and around, clockwise by the way. There are no windows or doors. The spindly chicken leg makes me think of a katub or a pillar, very straight up and down, and that is the center of the mystical realm. When doing zikr, Sufis, we do zikr, we turn around our inner pole. That's what we're doing, we're circling around our inner center. And when the whirling dervish turns around his own center, he's actually doing zikr. So there's a turning around our own center. And this center could also be the kundalini. It is the pole, this is a quote, of the internal microcosm and center of the world. It is here that the visionary can meet his personal Holy Spirit. Communication with the Alam al-Mathal is possible only at the center of the world. So this is the very center. We are told that the Baba Yaga's hut contains a stove on which lies the Baba Yaga. And the stove symbolizes a great heart, the center of all. Now, it's not a stove as we know it. It's like a Russian stove or a Scandinavian stove with all the channels of air flowing through it and big, almost like cavities of the heart. It's a massive structure. In Eastern Europe as well, they have it. And it symbolizes the great heart. And I find it astonishing that it seems to be an altar on which lies the Baba Yaga, with her nose pressed up against the ceiling. In other words, there is no room above the stove or the heart for anything else except the Baba Yaga. The Baba Yaga represents the great teacher or guide of souls for those who know how to face her and request her help. The house of the Baba Yaga is constantly turning, but Prince Ivan has been taught enough to know what to do in this situation, and he says his incantation, "Turn your back to the forest and your face to me." In other words, face me so I can enter the deep forest or mysterious inner realm. When the prince enters the house of the Baba Yaga, she questions him immediately, but he rebukes her and asks for food, drink, and a hot bath. This, intentionally or not, is an echo of an old Sufi teaching about the duties of hospitality. The dervish must first offer salams, then food, and then conversation. So he actually has a right to scold her. It also shows how we can expect to be helped by the teacher when we do know how to approach her. Of course, Baba Yaga knew everything that was happening and explains how difficult and dangerous it would be to get the princess away from Kashay the Deathless. She tells him that to kill Kashay, the prince must realize that Kashay's death is right at the point of a needle. The needle is in an egg, the egg in a duck, the duck in the hare, and the hare is sitting in a stone chest, which is in a lofty oak, and Kashay guards the oak as he would the apple of his eye. This is mysterious and seriously long work, long and difficult work, to the point, literally, the place where his disjunction with his soul originated. All the creatures, the traits that he had previously helped, now come to his aid. The bear represents great strength and fortitude, which is needed to uproot the great oak tree that holds the cask in its crown. Our inner structure must be uprooted before we can move on. Our whole understanding of our world, our attitude, our background, beliefs, and culture must be destroyed to make way for transformation. Then the cask falls out of the tree and is smashed to pieces. It releases a hare which jumps out of the chest and runs as fast as it can go. The hare could represent nimbleness of mind and outwitting dull brute force. But the hare is also a companion of witches and of Freya, the great goddess of love. But immediately another hare races out of the chest, catches the first hare and tears it to pieces. When we discover a trait within ourselves, such as being quick-witted like the hare, we must develop and understand it, really get to know it, and then it becomes your enemy. And so it has to be defeated by the very trait it has become. It does take a thief to catch a thief. And there is the example of the Enneagram, again, where, if we find out I'm a 2, as I've said, and therefore to catch this 2-ness in me, this wanting to be helpful, it needs, which is under the power of the ego, it needs the genuine purity of that trait of really wanting to be helpful, the divine trait of being helpful that belongs to the soul to overcome the trait that has been grabbed by the ego. And so the hare, one hare catches the other hare and kills it, so therefore the hare that's left is the one that is the soul hare. A duck then manifests out of the pieces of the hare. It flies right up into the sky. When we kill part of ourselves, of our ego, because we can't actually kill a part of our ego, something else manifests out of it. And the duck is the mediator between water and sky. It lives in that in-between place. So the transformed hare, now a duck, carries the egg within it. However, as the prince watched, a drake flew at the duck, and as the duck struck her, she let fall the egg. The egg dropped into the deep blue sea. And notice that a duck egg is also blue, as was the azure crown of the Princess Vasilisa. The duck and the drake together depict the union of lovers, but in this case, as we see, the drake had to strike the duck to release the egg. The egg is the cosmic egg, the life principle and potentiality of everything, the germ of creation. It is the hidden origin and mystery of being. In this case, the egg is dropped back into the ocean of the unconscious. And when Prince Ivan saw this, he shed bitter tears. How could he ever find that egg in the vast sea? And this is the stage where we do get really disheartened. We are so far on the journey, but how are we ever going to find that egg? And it comes up in another story of the little humpbacked horse, where there's something at the bottom of the ocean, and again it's another Ivan sits there and is in despair. How can we ever find the egg in that vastness of the deep unconscious? The collective unconscious, the realm of the gods and the archetypes. And we need patience here. But suddenly the pike swam up to the shore with the egg in its mouth. This is the pike that he didn't kill earlier in the story. When we spend time in contemplation or meditation, we find ourselves deep in the ocean of the inner realm. Often we find insight and make new discoveries. The old wise pike is part of ourselves which inhabits the watery realm. It's a feisty fighting fish which can bring us the cosmic egg. And Murshida, our teacher, who passed away last year at the age of 99, I must say, always used to say that to be spiritual is not to be a doormat. We need to be that feisty fighting side of ourselves to find the cosmic egg. Now, he had no time for the people who were so terribly spiritual, and he was very feisty himself. It is the prince who breaks the egg, takes out the needle, and sets to work to snap its point. Nearly there, to break the point of the needle is the most difficult and almost impossible task of all. I'll skip a bit. In snapping that point, the small self no longer has a hold and the soul is free. He has to go back to the point of his disjunction from his soul and break that point. And the point of disjunction was where he burned the frog skin, perhaps, I think. And in the story of the trophy wife here, if she was to be saved, if you like, from feeling that she was acting and being a fake in so many ways, even in faking her own pleasure in a sensual way, she was trying to be the best wife, the best mother, the best everything. Her husband would have to go back through every expectation, every memory, everything, one thing within the other thing within the other, right back to the point where possibly he saw her in all her beauty and wanted her. His ego wanted her like that. And therefore he burnt her frog skin. And I think that's what he meant. So that work, it was impossible in the woman that I knew. She couldn't do it because she couldn't own up herself to her husband that she had been faking it all. And she didn't think that he could cope with her coming true, to be truthful with him. So it was very sad for her. And it really, her marriage was actually quite doomed. But we see that so often. Think Melania Trump. So when he has done this, because he does achieve it, it's incredible work, but he does it. He gets there, he breaks the point of the needle, he gets right back to that point where he burnt the frog skin, and he goes back to the White Palace to find his beloved, and she is there, and that White Palace is very, very much like the palace in the Fairy of the Dawn. It has the same description. It's very interesting, completely different story. The princess knows he's come, runs out to meet him, and kisses him on the lips. And they are now united in the sacred marriage. So that is the end of that story, rather abruptly. We've seen the role of the witch as teacher, the role of the flying horse as the internalized teacher and guide, and the role of the goddesses as the inner teacher within us on our journey. The story that I would have liked to have worked with after this is Cenerentola, which is a very ancient version of Cinderella. And in that we would discover the path of the princess who alone, without any help, achieves her queendom. But we haven't got time for it. I did want to, but I couldn't squeeze it in. So that's it. And I did it in an hour.
Well done, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few moments left for questions, which I'm sure there might be quite a few. No?
Oh, I've stunned them all. They might still be floating in that other realm.
In that other realm, I think so. Yes.
You mentioned the flute a couple of times. What did that actually symbolise?
In our practice, we use sound very often, and we chant Hu, and the Buddhists chant Om. The vibration of that sound, in particular, when we do it, actually. How can I put it? It actually stills the mind and puts everything to sleep in there, all the chatter and everything that goes on, so that we can be perfectly still and centered and focus on what we need to focus on. Everything else is asleep. And that's why I like Lord Krishna has the flute. And sound is very important. And there are different sounds that we use for the different chakras. We have practiced which sounds the chakras. Sorry?
Also,
it can be in the way I think it's to do with that. We also work with color. So sound and color are similar vibrations. So there's vibrations at the different levels of the chakras which go with colors and which go with the elements. And we also use breathing practices, pranayama, and concentration, and all sorts of practices. The gaining of mastery over yourself in the inner realm is really important. And it is important because you can lose yourself when you go in there. And also the ego can grab it, so you have to be very careful. Like so many gurus back in the 70s got caught up. They knew their stuff, they really did know their stuff, but they got caught, their ego got caught in things, and they lost themselves. And so it's very important to hold, to use sound in a sense.
And lost a lot of other people on the way.
Oh, they did. It was terrible. Yes, that's why it's quite dangerous. It's like doing in a way doing Kundalini practices without having mastery of them. It's dangerous.
Yeah. Being overwhelmed by that archetypal material.
Oh
too.
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Any other questions?
yeah, so when you say lose themselves, what do you mean? Do they just not function, or what do you mean by that?
Oh, sorry. What was
When you say they lose themselves,
They
what
literally.
does it actually mean?
They literally can lose their minds. I knew of people back in the 80s here that did rebirthing, and they went to a Friday night rebirthing talk, they did the weekend, and they went into a space that they couldn't come out of again. And that they literally lost themselves.
I'll just say something. Sometimes it's known as psychosis.
Yes, thank you, it is really, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, sorry, John. Yeah. Right.
Oh.
Right. There's one over here.
I just want to say
feel like I heard that in your story, the fear of the people, and especially men in the way, the patriarchy, fears a woman's power and realness. I don't mean like, what's her name, Trump, Mrs. Trump. Someone's sculpted, decked, plucked, pruned, washed, bleached, you know, until there's not much of who the actual person is. And I'm just curious about your thoughts of where you feel that originated from this. I think it's like a kind of a murder and rape ongoing with the feminine. And I feel I stand very comfortable in saying that and not coming from a place of needing approval from any of the audience and saying that as well.
Well, so there's a few things now that opens up a lot of things. Can you hear me? In that, first of all, it's the feminine and not women, although women carry the feminine. And in fact, Robert Johnson, who was here many years ago, he said, you know, men search for the Grail Castle and knock and have to answer the question, and then finally they get admitted to the Grail to drink from the cup, but women live in the Grail Castle. And there's this thing about the feminine journey is different, and that's why Cenerentola, the story is very interesting. But, no, we'll rewind. What was I going to say? I forgot.
Where did it originate?
Your perception of where that, because you sound like you've done a lot of research and study, we perceive that where the feminine started to become.
Oh, yes, yes. Look, that very much came from... Sorry, is that better? That actually comes from the goddesses. If you, in Cenerentola, we come across the goddess Hestia, who is the goddess of the hearth, the center of everything. There's a lot of centers in these stories, but it comes together there. Hestia was really the last of the Titans and the first of the Olympians. You know, she was born of Zeus. But she rejected her suitors, I think Apollo and Poseidon, I think perhaps. And because she knew that if she encouraged them, there would be war, and she was for peace. If you look at the goddess Hestia, I think the times before the Olympians was a time where the feminine was in her full flowering, a bit like Freya. If you look at Hestia and Freya are amazing. And I think humanity went through those times. And then the patriarchy with the Olympians and with Zeus came and took over. And everything else was repressed and submerged. And I actually... And apologies to Christians, but I think that Christianity had a lot to do with that, to be honest with you. So I think that's where does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does actually. That's pretty much how I was kind of seeing it when the solar worshipping gods started to become and wipe out the feminine worshipping cultures in order to exist. Yeah.
I'm working with a story at the moment. It's have I got time?
Yes.
Very quickly. I've got a cousin who lives in Ireland, in Dublin, and her father-in-law went around in the 1930s recording old Gaelic-speaking storytellers in the west of Ireland from the Gaeltacht. And he actually recorded one of these old storytellers. And my cousin wrote and said, oh, you might be interested in this story. And I thought, oh no, it's going to be like another Beowulf. And then she sent it to me. It is amazing because it is before the times of the patriarchy, when the masculine and feminine were equal in their power but not the same. And there were women warriors, women warriors in those days. And it's an amazing story. And hopefully I'll get it written one day. It's quite a big book. One page in Irish and one page in English.
Oh, how wonderful.
Oh, it's great. And it's not known at all. It's really interesting. Sorry.
I was going to say, perhaps we might have time for one more question.
The last question, I suppose, is what drew you to rise, to experience, to think about witches? What drew you?
When I started this, it was, as I say, our teacher Nawab told us the story of Golden Chisel and the Stone Ram. And then I said to him, okay, send me another story. And maybe you could send me one which has more feminine in it, because the Golden Chisel, it was a Chinese story, there isn't a hint of the feminine. So he sent me the little humpy-backed horse, which I've worked with here years ago. And in that one, the Tsar maid actually becomes the Tsar. The feminine becomes the Tsar in her own right, and the hero becomes her consort. And I loved that. So I worked with that for about a year, and then I asked Nawab for another story. And then he sent me The Fairy of the Dawn. And then I said, yeah, well, more feminine, more feminine. And then he sent me The Frog Princess. And finally, he sent me Cenerentola. And then he sent me another one. I said, no, that's it. Five does it. And then I've put it all together over about 15 years of weaving the stories in together into my own life, actually, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I resolved some mysteries from my own life, which are in the book as well. Yeah.
And on that note,
oh yeah.
Nuria has her book, The Witch as Teacher in Fairy Tales, available for people to buy, and she's quite happy to autograph the book for you. So I'd encourage you to have a look at this. And join me in thanking Nuria for a wonderful... There's such a lovely gift you have to be able to tell a story.
I love storytelling.
It's just beautiful.